Romans 2, let's call it savings as usual, thanking God for giving us the chance to get back to his word. In chapter 2 is going to seem to build off of that principle in Romans 1 that says there are some things that those who do not believe in God are rightly condemned for, but because God is fair, he cautions his people, don't get all gassed up or excited when you see just condemnation coming to those outside of God or the faith when it comes to them, because he's going to keep that same energy for us to the degree we're repeating or doing the very same things. But with that, the outline of the chapter roughly seems to break down in the first 5 verses, establishing exactly that. Who we are outwardly needs to match who we are inwardly, because no matter how much we claim to be the people of God, if we commit the same wrongs as those who claim to be free from God's law, the same wrongs that they commit, then we're going to get the same judgment that they get. And with that, he is going to go on and say that it's not okay, once again, to have one standard for them and another for ourselves. Building on that, verses 6 through 11, it's going to talk about that judgment that God is going to give us, building off of that last verse, verse 5 in that previous section, saying that we are, to the degree we keep a double standard, we are storing up for ourselves wrath on the day that God comes in judgment, as he promises to in verses 6 through 11, saying it's really straightforward. He's going to reward those who have committed themselves to doing good, and he is going to also reward those who committed themselves to doing bad. But it's going to be 2 different rewards, as verses 12 through 16 is going to say. Understand that even the Gentiles who act more according to the law than the Hebrews of that day, they can expect a better judgment or a better meeting with God than those who are outwardly exceptional Hebrews, but inwardly aren't doing a great job of obeying the law. He's going to say that even though they have not learned the law, they're actually going to look even better, because not having studied the law, their conscience is still in check, keeping them in touch with what God has tried to get people to understand through that basic summation that Christ gave of the law, of basically understanding that the answer key to all the different provisions in the law is summed up in simply treating people the way that you want to be treated, loving God first above all, and then loving people, not only as we want to be loved, not only loving our neighbor as ourselves, but Jesus in John 13 elevates the standard and says, as he gave you the example of loving sacrificially. It's not enough just to have parity. If you're really going to walk in his steps, you're going to have to, in some circumstances, maybe in many circumstances, put the needs of others above our own or yourselves. As in verses 17 through 24, Paul is going to seem to lament the way that they have gotten into the habit of flipping that and basically prioritize putting themselves above others. And low key, whether they realize it or not, in doing that, they've been putting themselves before God, and therefore they have fallen beneath the standard that even a righteous Gentile, somebody who doesn't necessarily know God well because they don't understand the law of God, fallen beneath the standard that they would have for treating one another, even though they are simply functioning on conscience or instinct without the deeper understanding of the way that God has called his people to understand and apply that basic law of fairness, parity, and treating one another, as we said, the way you want to be treated. And so because they are so self-interested and self-righteous that even the pagans consider God not worth following, because basically, as we even hear sometimes today, if that's what it means to follow God, why bother? And that's exactly the circumstance that Paul is lamenting here. And for that reason, he goes on in the final verses of the chapter 25 through 29 to say the only reward you can expect from God for being a Hebrew or a person of God is if you are just as much a person of God inwardly as you are outwardly. There he specifically says Hebrew, but because he is talking to a church that's largely comprised of Gentile believers, his message is to the Gentiles as well, understanding that the big division in the church is between the Gentile believers and the Hebrews, the more established people of God, who are potentially looking down on the Gentiles as being new to this whole relationship with God business. But the thing that they have in common is, as I think the last verse suggests, a tendency or a temptation to be distracted by the recognition that we can get from people. A recognition that can distract us from the fact that, as we mentioned in the very beginning of the chapter, we all have an account or a savings into which our deeds are investing. And that account is repaid by God, who once again as we have talked about so much leading up to this point, chapter 2, that reminds us to keep that same energy for others as we do for ourselves, or maybe vice versa, keep that same energy for ourselves that we have for others on their day of judgment. God repays that account based upon who we are, not so much who we pretend to be.